The chamber floated in the darkness between stars. A massive ring of metal and light that had witnessed 1,000 civilizations rise and fall. Inside, the air hummed with translated voices from 847 different species. Commander Vix stood at the center platform, his forearms folded behind his back, watching the holographic display rotate slowly above the assembled representatives. Earth appeared as a blue marble, turning gently in the projection. Small text floated around it in the common galactic script. Population, 8 billion. Technology level, primitive, nuclear. Unified government, none. Threat assessment, negligible. Vix tapped a control pad with one of his lower hands. The display zoomed closer, showing cities lit up across the night side of the planet. He had reviewed hundreds of worlds like this one. They all looked the same from space. Tiny lights, tiny lives. Resources waiting to be harvested. The planet designated as Earth Sol 3 has been evaluated according to standard protocols, Vix announced. His voice carrying through translation devices embedded in every seat. The dominant species shows signs of early space exploration, but lacks faster-than-light capability. They have divided themselves into 195 separate territorial nations. Internal conflicts are common. They have detonated nuclear weapons on their own planet during territorial disputes. A ripple of clicking sounds moved through the chamber. Several species found this amusing. Others simply waited for the conclusion they already knew was coming. Atmospheric composition is suitable for 17 of our member species without modification, Vix continued. The planet contains substantial deposits of rare minerals, particularly in the regions they call Africa and South America. Liquid water covers 71% of the surface. By all measurements, this is a Class 7 primitive world ready for resource extraction. A delegate from the Corvash sector raised a crystalline appendage. What is their military capability? Vix pulled up another display. Crude rockets with chemical propulsion. Approximately 13,000 nuclear warheads distributed among 9 of their nations. They have managed to destroy several of their own satellites with kinetic weapons. Their largest vessel can carry 7 individuals to their natural satellite in return. Estimated time for them to develop adequate defense systems, 300 years minimum. The crystalline delegate pulsed with satisfied light. Then, there is no debate required. Vix nodded. The harvest fleet has been placed on standby. With your approval, we will initiate the standard first contact protocol. The species will be given the choice to join the convergence as a labor class or face resource extraction procedures. Historical data suggests 97% of Class 7 civilizations choose extinction over compliance. Elemetsus, another voice called out from the shadows. The outcome is always the same. The vote was called. 847 lights appeared in the chamber, one for each member species. Within seconds, they all turned the same color. Green for approval. Earth had been marked. Vix closed the display. The fleet will depart within 1 solar cycle. Estimated arrival at Earth Cell 3, 90 standard days. Harvest operations will commence immediately upon rejection of our terms. The chamber began to empty. Representatives returned to their ships, their duties complete. Another world added to the convergence. Another resource deposit claimed. Vix remained on the platform, watching the hologram of Earth spin in the darkness, on the other side of the galaxy. In a small observatory built into the mountains outside Seoul, Daehyun rubbed his tired eyes and stared at the monitor. The night shift always felt longer during winter. His coffee had gone cold an hour ago. He continued to scan the deep space frequencies anyway. Something flickered on his screen. A burst of organized noise from a region of space that should have been silent. Daehyun sat up straighter, adjusting the filters. The signal appeared again, stronger this time. It was not natural. Natural cosmic radiation did not pulse in mathematical patterns. Yuna, he called across the room. Come look at this. His colleague shuffled over, holding her own cup of coffee. She leaned over his shoulder and squinted at the display. Probably just interference from one of the new satellites. You know how many companies are launching communications arrays these days? The frequency is wrong, Daehyun insisted. This is coming from outside the solar system. way outside. And look at the pattern structure. That is not random noise. Yuna watched the screen for another minute, then shrugged. Archive it if you want, but I would not get excited. We pick up weird signals all the time. Space is full of strange things. Remember last year when everyone thought we detected an alien megastructure? It turned out to be a cloud of frozen debris. Daehyun was not convinced, but he nodded anyway. He saved the data to the observatory's archive system and flagged it for further analysis. Yuna returned to her station, already forgetting about the anomaly. But Daehyun kept watching. The signals continued throughout the night, growing slightly stronger each hour. He noted the time stamp, the exact coordinates, and the frequency patterns. Something in his gut told him this was different. This was important. 12 sectors away, the Harvest Fleet began its preparations. 3,000 warships detached from their orbital stations and formed into attack formations. Each vessel was 5 kilometers long, equipped with weapons that could turn continents into glass within minutes. The crews had performed this duty hundreds of times before. They knew the procedures. They knew the outcomes. Commander Vix boarded his flagship and watched the fleet assemble through the observation windows. The ships moved with perfect coordination, engines blazing as they aligned for the long journey to Earth. The target coordinates were locked into every navigation system. Sol system. Third planet. 90 days? He felt nothing about the mission. The species on Earth would receive their warning. They would refuse. The harvest would proceed. Resources would be extracted. The convergence would grow stronger. This was the way things had always been done. Vix turned away from the window and walked toward the command center. Behind him, 3,000 warships began their acceleration toward a small blue planet that had no idea what was coming. 3 weeks passed before Daehyun could not ignore the signals anymore. Every night shift brought more of them. The patterns were getting clearer, more organized. He had filled an entire hard drive with recordings, and still Yuna insisted it was nothing important. But Daehyun knew better. He had been studying astrophysics for 15 years, and these signals were unlike anything in the textbooks. He requested a meeting with Professor Jiwon at Seoul National University. The professor was a legend in the field, someone who had published papers that changed how scientists understood deep space communications. If anyone could make sense of this data, it would be her. Professor Jiwon sat in her office, surrounded by stacks of papers and old star charts. She looked over her glasses at Daehyun when he entered, already appearing skeptical. "You said this was urgent?" "I have a grant proposal due tomorrow." Daehyun connected his external drive to her computer and pulled up the first set of recordings. "I've been tracking these signals for 3 weeks now. They are coming from outside our galaxy, and they are definitely artificial. The mathematical structures are too precise to be natural phenomena." Juan leaned forward, her skepticism fading as she watched the data scroll across her screen. She ran a few quick analysis programs, her fingers moving rapidly across the keyboard. The results made her pause. This should not be possible. The energy required to transmit something this strong across intergalactic distances would be enormous. "That is what I thought too," Daehyun said. "But there is more. The patterns repeat on multiple frequencies simultaneously. It is like someone is trying to make absolutely sure the message is received." Ji-won spent the next 2 hours examining every file Daehyun had brought. She ran the signals through every analysis program the university owned. As the afternoon turned to evening, her expression grew more serious. Finally, she looked up at Daehyun with worry in her eyes. "I need to bring my team in on this. If what I think I am seeing is accurate, this is not just a scientific curiosity. This could be a communication directed at us. At Earth, specifically, they spent the next week working around the clock. Gyewan assembled a team of her best graduate students and gave them access to the university's quantum computing array. The computers ran millions of translation algorithms, trying to find patterns that matched known mathematical constants, physical laws. Anything that could serve as a universal language. On the 8th day, the computers found something. The team gathered around the main display as the translation program highlighted 3 distinct pattern groups that appeared repeatedly throughout all the signals. The quantum computer had compared these patterns against every known database of mathematical and physical constants. 3 words appeared on the screen with 78% confidence: harvest, compliance, extinction protocol. Nobody spoke for a long moment. Juan stared at the screen, her face pale. One of the graduate students started crying quietly. Daehyun felt his stomach turn cold. "We need to contact the government," Giwon said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Right now." The Korean Ministry of Science and Technology took the data seriously. Within 24 hours, they had contacted the United Nations Space Affairs Office. Within 48 hours, observatories around the world were pointing there. Instruments at the coordinates Daehyun had provided what they found made the situation exponentially worse. Massive objects were moving through space toward the solar system. Thousands of them. They were still far away, but their trajectory was unmistakable. They were heading directly for Earth. They were traveling faster than anything humanity had ever created. The news broke globally within hours. Governments could not contain information this big. Social media exploded with theories, panic, and desperate prayers. Stock markets crashed. Some cities erupted into riots. Religious leaders offered conflicting interpretations. Scientists appeared on every news channel, trying to explain what was coming while admitting they had no idea how to stop it. Captain Minho received his orders at 0300 hours. Report immediately to United Nations headquarters in Geneva. Classified briefing. Maximum priority. He had been in the Korean Space Force for 12 years, training for conflicts that mostly involved satellite defense and orbital debris management. Nothing in his training had prepared him for this. The briefing room was filled with military. Officers from 30 different nations, generals, admirals, Space Force commanders, all looking at the same satellite imagery and sensor data. The objects approaching Earth were not natural. They were artificial constructs, each one larger than the biggest aircraft carrier humanity had ever built. And there were 3,000 of them. A UN military coordinator stood at the front of the room, his face grim. Latest calculations put their arrival at 42 days from now. We have attempted radio communication on every frequency. No response. We have transmitted mathematical proofs, chemical formulas, even basic pictograms. Nothing. They are coming, and they are not interested in talking to us yet. A general from the United States stood up. "What are our military options?" Limited to non-existent, the coordinator replied bluntly. "We have run simulations. Even if we launched every nuclear weapon simultaneously and somehow managed to hit their fleet, the energy required to cross that distance would detonate most warheads prematurely. The few that reached target would likely be ineffective against vessels of that size. We have nothing in orbit that could serve as an adequate defense platform, so we do nothing." A Russian admiral demanded. "We just wait for them to arrive and hope they are friendly?" Captain Minho raised his hand. The coordinator nodded at him. "Sir, what if we approach this differently? What if instead of trying to fight them or hide from them, we show them who we are?" The room turned to look at him. Several officers appeared confused. Minho continued. "The signal that Dr. Daehyun decoded mentioned harvest and compliance. That suggests they see us as resources or potential slaves. They think they know what we are. What if we prove them wrong? What if we transmit everything? Our entire history, our art, our music, our failures and achievements. Everything that makes us human," French general scoffed. "You want to send them our civilization's greatest hits and hope they develop sympathy?" "Not sympathy," Minho said firmly. "Understanding. They are crossing space to harvest a planet they think is primitive and simple. We show them we are neither. We show them exactly what they would be destroying." The room erupted into arguments. Half the officers thought it was stupid. The other half thought it was insane. But nobody had a better plan. And with 42 days until arrival, humanity was running out of time to do anything at all. The United Nations voted on Captain Minho's proposal at midnight Geneva time. 83 nations voted in favor. 42 voted against. 20 abstained. It was not unanimous, but it was enough. Humanity would send its story to the stars. The project was given a name: Testament Protocol. Teams assembled across every continent within hours. The task was enormous. Take everything humanity had created, everything it had achieved, everything it had suffered through, and compress it into a format that could be transmitted across space with enough power to reach the incoming fleet. Hannah arrived in Geneva 2 days after the vote. She was a data architect from Busan, someone who had spent her career designing compression algorithms for satellite communications companies. When the government contacted her, she had been working on a system to transmit high-definition video through limited bandwidth. Now she was being asked to compress the entire human experience into a 17-second burst. Transmission? She met with Daehyun and Professor Giwan in converted conference room that had become the Testament Protocol headquarters. Screens covered every wall, showing data streams from around the world. Scientists, artists, historians, and engineers worked at dozens of terminals. The mathematics are brutal, Hannah explained. Writing equations on a whiteboard. We can generate enough power for the transmission. But the data compression required is beyond anything we have attempted before. We are not talking about sending a message. We are talking about sending consciousness itself. Context, emotion, meaning. We have been collecting data for 3 days now. Museums are digitizing their entire collections. Libraries are scanning every book. Recording studios are providing their archives. But how do we compress Shakespeare and Beethoven and the pyramids and the moon landing into something that can be transmitted in 17 seconds? We use quantum entanglement, Hannah said. Not for transmission speed, but for data density. We can encode information across multiple dimensional states simultaneously. The receiver would need quantum processing to decode it, but any species capable of crossing space should have that technology. Daehyun looked worried. Will they even understand what they are receiving? Our entire approach assumes they think like we do. They sent us a message, Hannah replied. Harvest, compliance, extinction protocol. They use language. They use concepts. That means they have culture. They have decision-making processes. If they have those things, they can understand stories. And stories are what we are sending. The collection phase took 2 weeks. Every major museum in the world contributed. The Louvre sent higher resolution scans of paintings spanning 5,000 years. The British Museum provided artifacts from every civilization. The Smithsonian transmitted recordings of every music genre ever documented. The Library of Congress uploaded millions of books in hundreds of languages. But it was not just the great achievements. Minho had insisted they include everything. Videos of children laughing, recordings of protests and revolutions, documentation of wars and genocides, medical journals showing diseases humanity had conquered, environmental data showing the damage humans had caused to their own planet, wedding photos, funeral ceremonies, birth records, death certificates. They need to see all of it, Minho told the committee during a briefing. Not just our best moments. They need to see our worst too. They need to understand that we are messy and contradictory and capable of both great kindness and terrible cruelty. That is what being human means. Hannah worked 18-hour days developing the compression system. The quantum encoding algorithms were the most complex anyone had ever attempted. She collaborated with physicists in 3 countries, refining the mathematics until they could pack exponentially more information into the transmission than should have been physically possible. Professor Juan handled the astrophysics. The transmission would not be sent from space. There was not enough time to build and launch an adequate satellite system. Instead, they would link every major radio telescope and observatory on Earth, turning the entire planet into one massive broadcasting array. The power requirements were staggering. We will need to draw from every major power grid simultaneously, Chuan explained during a presentation to the energy ministers of 40 nations. For 17 seconds, Earth will consume approximately 40% of its total power generation capacity. Hospitals will need backup systems. Critical infrastructure must be secured. Some regions may experience temporary blackouts. And if this fails, a minister asked, if they ignore our transmission and proceed with their harvest anyway, Juan met his eyes. Then at least we tried. At least we showed them who we are before the end. The final compilation took 3 days. Hannah and her team assembled the data streams into a coherent, quantum-encoded format. The file size was incomprehensible by normal standards, compressed across multiple dimensional states. It contained approximately 8 billion individual human stories, 3 million pieces of art, 2 million musical compositions, 5,000 years of recorded history, and countless moments of ordinary life captured on video and audio. The transmission array was tested on day 30. Every major observatory on Earth synced their systems. The radio telescopes in Arecibo, Parks, Green Bank, and Joe Drill Bank all aligned. The Allen Telescope Array in California and the 500-meter Aperture Spherical Telescope in China both confirmed ready status. Smaller observatories in South Africa, Australia, India, and Chile reported successful integration. Captain Minho stood in the central control room in Geneva, watching the countdown. Representatives from every nation sat at terminals, monitoring their respective systems. Hannah sat at the master console, her fingers hovering over the final activation sequence. Professor Juan stood beside her, checking and rechecking the calculations. Daehyun watched from the back of the room, thinking about the night shift 3 months ago when he first detected those strange signals. He wondered if humanity would survive long enough to detect strange signals again. He hoped so. Fleet position confirmed, a technician called out. They are 3 million kilometers from Earth orbit, still approaching. No change in trajectory. All power grids, reporting ready status, another voice announced. Backup systems active for critical infrastructure. Hannah looked up at Minho. You're ready, Captain. On your order. Minho took a breath. This was it. Humanity's last chance to speak before the universe decided their fate. He thought about everything that transmission contained. Every painting his daughter had made in school, every song his grandmother used to sing, every scientific discovery, every act of kindness, every stupid mistake humanity had ever made. All of it was about to be launched into space. Send it, Minho said quietly. Hannah pressed the activation key. Earth blazed. Every telescope, every observatory, every linked system fired simultaneously. The power draw was so enormous that lights dimmed across entire continents. The transmission array created a focus beam of quantum-encoded information that tore through space itself, traveling not at light speed, but through dimensional folds, arriving instantaneously at its destination. For 17 seconds, Earth screamed its existence into the void. Then it was over. The systems shut down. Power grids began returning to normal. In the control room, nobody spoke. They had done everything they could. Now they could only wait for the response. Above them, 3 million kilometers away, the Harvest Fleet received something they had never encountered before. And everything changed. Commander Vix was reviewing the final approach vectors when every system on the flagship suddenly screamed alerts. Not damage warnings. Not weapon locks. Something else entirely. An information cascade of unprecedented magnitude had just struck every ship in the fleet simultaneously. Vix barked, his forearms moving across multiple control panels. Unknown transmission received from the target planet. His communications officer replied, mandibles clicking rapidly in confusion. It penetrated our shields. It bypassed our filters. Sir, it is everywhere. In every system. Every database. Every personal device. I cannot isolate it. Vix pulled up the transmission analysis. The data structure was unlike anything in Convergence records. It was not a message. It was not a warning. It was something far more dangerous. It was context. Quarantine all affected systems, Vix ordered. Full information lockdown? No crew member is to access any device until we understand what this is. But it was already too late. Across 3,000 warships, crew members had begun opening the files. The transmission had been designed specifically to be irresistible to curious minds. It presented itself as a puzzle, as art, as story. And once someone started viewing it, they could not stop. In the crew quarters of the flagship, a young Talvern soldier named Kix accessed the transmission on his personal viewer. He expected a primitive plea for mercy, perhaps crude attempts at communication. What he found instead was a video of a human child laughing while playing with a small animal called a dog. Kix watched the entire file, then he watched another. A human wedding ceremony, then another. A symphony orchestra performing something called Beethoven's Ninth, then another. A documentary about a war where millions died, then another. A speech by someone named Martin Luther King Jr. about dreams and equality. He could not stop. Each file led to another, creating pathways through human experience that felt alive. The transmission was not organized like a database. It was organized like memory, like emotion, like the way a mind naturally made connections between ideas. Across the fleet, thousands of crew members were experiencing the same thing. They watched humans building cities and destroying them. They listened to music that made no logical sense, but somehow conveyed feelings they had never experienced. They read stories about individuals making impossible choices. They saw art that served no practical purpose except to exist. Commander Vix tried to access the bridge, but his officers were not responding. He found them all staring at their stations, watching the transmission. His tactical officer had tears streaming down his face, something Vix had never seen in 20 years of service. "Sir," the tactical officer whispered, "they are showing us everything. Not just their achievements. Their failures too. Their contradictions. Their pain." Vix pushed him aside and looked at the screen. It was showing footage from something called World War II. Millions of humans killing each other with primitive weapons. Cities reduced to rubble. Then it shifted to show the same species working together to rebuild. Then it showed them splitting atoms. Then it showed them using that knowledge to destroy cities in seconds. Then it showed them choosing never to do it again. "They are chaos," Vix said slowly. "They have no control, no order. They fight themselves constantly," as his tactical officer agreed. But they also chose to stop. They could have destroyed themselves completely, but they decided not to. They chose to keep trying. "That is not chaos, sir. That is something else." Vix continued watching. The transmission showed him human art spanning thousands of years. Paintings that captured light and emotion. Sculptures that conveyed motion in stone. Music that ranged from perfect mathematical structure to wild improvisation. Literature that asked questions no Convergence member had considered in millennia. The Convergence had been efficient. They had been ordered. Every species was optimized for specific roles. There was no waste, no confusion, no contradiction. It had made them strong. It had made them conquer half the galaxy. But watching human civilization unfold in front of him, Vix realized what the Convergence had lost. They had eliminated chaos, but they had also eliminated the possibility of unexpected growth. They had created perfect order, but nothing truly new had emerged from that order in thousands of years. Humans were messy. They were violent. They were irrational. But they were also capable of creating beauty from suffering. They were capable of learning from their mistakes. They were capable of choosing mercy when logic demanded cruelty.
"Oh, sir,"
his communications officer called out. "I am receiving reports from across the fleet. All ships have stopped responding to commands. Crews are accessing the transmission. Weapon systems are still online, but nobody is manning them. Sir, the fleet has stopped." Vix looked out the observation window at the other ships. 3,000 warships, all motionless in space. All of them infected with something the Convergence had never encountered. Understanding, context, empathy, he opened a channel to the Galactic Convergence. "This is Commander Vix of the Harvest Fleet. We have reached Earth Sol 3 as ordered, but I am requesting an immediate emergency convocation. We cannot proceed with harvest operations." The response came back immediately. "Explain." "Your mission parameters are clear." Vix struggled to find the words. "The target species transmitted their complete cultural database directly to our fleet. Sir, they showed us everything. Not just data. They showed us why they create, why they fight, why they choose to continue existing despite knowing they will eventually die. I have been in the Convergence military for 40 years. I have supervised 37 harvest operations. This species is different. Different how? They are dangerous, Vix said carefully. But not in the way we assessed. They are dangerous because they represent something we eliminated from ourselves. They are evolutionary chaos that somehow produces innovation we cannot predict or control. If we harvest them, we lose the possibility of learning what they might become. There was a long pause. You are requesting we spare a Class 7 primitive civilization because you find their culture interesting? No, sir, Vix replied. I am requesting we spare them because the alternative is destroying something unique in the galaxy. Something the Convergence needs to study. They sent us this transmission knowing we could use it to target their weaknesses. They sent it anyway. That level of courage combined with that level of creativity makes them valuable beyond simple resource extraction. Another pause. The transmission has reached Convergence space. It is spreading through our communication networks. Other fleet commanders are reporting similar situations. The Council is convening now. Maintain your position. Do not approach the planet. Do not fire weapons. We will deliberate and provide new orders. The channel closed. Vix returned to watching the transmission. It was showing him something called the Apollo moon landing. Humans in primitive spacesuits planting a flag on their natural satellite. The video was old, recorded with inferior technology. But the emotion in the voices of the humans watching from their planet was overwhelming. They had achieved something impossible for them. They had looked at the sky and decided to go there. And they had succeeded not through genetic optimization or careful planning, but through sheer stubborn determination to try anyway. Kix appeared beside Vix, still watching as personal viewer. Sir, have you seen their music yet? They have this thing called jazz, where they deliberately break all the rules of proper composition. It should not work, but somehow it does. Vix nodded slowly. I have seen it. I have seen all of it. That is the problem. Once you start watching, you cannot stop. They have made their entire civilization into a story, and stories are contagious. Do you think the Council will spare them? I do not know, Vix admitted. But I know that harvesting them would be the wrong choice. They deserve time. They deserve the chance to see what they become. Throughout the fleet, crew members continued watching. They watched humans fall in love. They watched humans grieve. They watched humans create art for no reason except that beauty mattered to them. They watched humans sacrifice themselves for strangers. They watched humans destroy and rebuild and destroy and rebuild again. Always learning, always growing. The Harvest fleet remained motionless in space, 3 million kilometers from Earth, and for the first time in Convergence history, a harvest operation had been stopped not by weapons or shields, but by understanding. The Galactic Convergence Chamber had never held an emergency session like this before. All 847 member species sent their representatives through faster-than-light channels. The holographic projections filled the chamber until it looked like the inside of a star, glowing with countless forms of life. Commander Vix stood at the center platform again, but this time he was not requesting permission to harvest. He was requesting permission to reclassify an entire species and halt an operation that had been approved unanimously. Just 3 months earlier, the head of the Council, an ancient being whose species had founded the Convergence millennia ago, spoke first. Commander Vix, you have submitted a formal request to redesignate Earth-Sol 3 from Class 7. It's primitive to Paradox Class 1. This classification has never been used in Convergence history. Explain your reasoning. Activated his display. Images from the human transmission began playing across the chamber. The species transmitted their complete cultural database directly to the Harvest fleet. This was not a plea for mercy. It was a comprehensive presentation of their entire civilization. History, art, science, philosophy, everything. We have reviewed the transmission, the Council head replied. It shows a species with significant internal conflict, primitive technology, and no unified government. These factors support the original Class 7 designation. With respect, Council Head, those factors are precisely why they should be reclassified, Vix argued. Humans have achieved spaceflight, nuclear energy, and global communication networks. while maintaining individual cultural identities across 195 separate nations. They have fought wars that killed millions, then chose to create international laws to prevent such wars from happening again. They have destroyed portions of their own ecosystem, then dedicated massive resources to repairing the damage. They learned from failure in ways we eliminated from our own species thousands of years ago. A delegate from the Corvash sector interrupted. You are describing chaos and inefficiency. These are weaknesses, not strengths, are they? Vix challenged. When was the last time the Convergence produced something genuinely new? We optimize, we expand, we harvest, but we stopped creating anything unexpected centuries ago. Humans create constantly. Their art serves no practical purpose, yet they dedicate enormous resources to it. Their music violates efficient sound patterns, yet it conveys emotion we cannot replicate. Their literature asks questions we stopped asking when we achieved perfect order. Another delegate spoke up, their translation device carrying skepticism. You are suggesting we spare them because they make pleasant sounds and pretty pictures. No, Vic said firmly. I am suggesting we spare them because they represent evolutionary potential we can no longer access. Every member species of the Convergence was optimized before joining. We eliminated chaos. We eliminated unpredictability. We created a perfect system. But perfection cannot evolve. Humans are still evolving, still changing, still producing unexpected results from chaotic processes. If we harvest them, we lose the ability to observe and learn from that process. The Council had considered this. The transmission has spread throughout convergent space. Millions of our citizens have accessed it. Reports indicate unusual behavioral changes, increased interest in historical art forms, requests for recreational activities with no productivity goals. Some individuals are even reporting emotional responses to the human content. Is this not a form of contamination? Or adaptation, Vix countered. Perhaps we need contamination. Perhaps perfect efficiency has made us stagnant. The chamber erupted into debate. Delegates argued in hundreds of languages, their translations overlapping into a cacophony of conflicting opinions. Some demanded immediate harvest to prevent further cultural contamination. Others agreed with Vix that humanity represented something worth preserving. A third faction argued for complete quarantine, neither harvesting nor contacting the humans. On Earth, the waiting had become unbearable. 3 weeks had passed since the transmission. The alien fleet had stopped 3 million kilometers away and had not moved since. No communication had been received. No weapons had been fired. The ships just floated there in space, silent and motionless. Captain Minho spent his days in the control room, monitoring the fleet's position. Hannah had gone home to Busan to be with her family. Professor Giwan remained in Geneva, running calculations and simulations that no longer mattered. Dehain continued his night shifts at the observatory, watching the same stars he had always watched, wondering if humanity would live to see another year. The governments of Earth had prepared evacuation plans that everyone knew were... Where could 8 billion people evacuate to? Mars had a research station with 12 people. The Moon had a small mining operation. There was nowhere to run. Some people prayed. Some people protested. Some people continued going to work because what else could they do? Life went on because life had to go on, even when 3,000 alien warships floated just outside your planet's orbit, in the convergence chamber. The debate continued for 6 hours. Finally, the council had called for silence. We will vote. 3 options are presented. First, proceed with harvest operations as originally planned. Second, reclassify Earth's All 3 as Paradox Class 1 and establish a quarantine zone prohibiting contact. Third, reclassify and establish an observation protocol to study the species as they continue developing. The vote was called. 847 lights appeared. This time, they did not turn uniformly green. 212 voted for harvest. They believed in traditional protocols and saw humans as resources. It's nothing more. 309 voted for quarantine. They acknowledged something unique about humanity, but feared contamination of convergence. Culture. 326 voted for observation. They believed humanity represented something valuable enough to preserve and study. The council head processed the results by a majority vote. Earth Sol 3 is hereby reclassified as Paradox Class 1. An observation protocol will be established. No species may approach within 5 light-years of their system without council authorization. The Harvest Fleet will withdraw immediately. Commander Vix, you are tasked with delivering the official communication to the human species. Vix felt something he had not experienced in decades: relief. Council Head, what message should I convey? Tell them the truth, the council head replied. Tell them they have earned time. Tell them we will watch what they become. Vix returned to his flagship and composed the message carefully. It could not be too complex. The humans did not have translation technology, but it had to convey the decision clearly. He settled on a combination of mathematics, imagery, and simple audio patterns. The message would show the fleet withdrawing. It would show Earth marked with a protective boundary. It would show the concept of time passing. And it would end with a question mark, a symbol the humans used to indicate inquiry. The transmission was sent on all frequencies. Vix watched it cross the distance to Earth, knowing that in a few minutes, the humans would receive their answer. In Geneva, alarms sounded in the control room. Minho ran to his station. We are receiving a transmission from the fleet. The message played on every screen. Nobody spoke as they watched the animations. The alien ships turning away. Earth surrounded by a protective sphere. A clock showing years passing. Then the question mark. Professor Giwan translated what she was seeing. They are leaving. They are protecting us. But they are also asking us something. They want to know what we will become. What do we tell them? Someone asked. Mill smiled for the first time in weeks. Nothing yet. We show them. We show them by continuing to be exactly what we are. Chaotic, creative, contradictory, and determined to survive. The Harvest Fleet began its withdrawal. 3,000 warships turned in perfect formation and accelerated away from Earth. Across the planet, people watched the skies and saw nothing change. The stars looked the same as they always had, but everything was different now. Humanity had been seen. They had been judged. And they had been given the most precious gift the universe could offer. Time Dehayan sat in the observatory, watching the deep space frequencies. The alien signals were fading now, moving away. He thought about that first night when he detected the anomaly. He thought about how close humanity had come to extinction. But they had survived. Not through weapons or shields or superior technology. They had survived by being human, by showing the universe exactly who they were, flaws and all, and making the universe care. Yuna walked over with 2 cups of coffee, both hot this time. So what do we do now? Dehayan accepted the coffee and smiled. We keep exploring. We keep creating. We keep being human. And maybe someday we will be ready to join them out there. On our terms, above Earth, a new designation was added to every star chart in convergent space. Earth Sol 3, Paradox Class 1, protected, observed, unknown potential, and across the galaxy. 847 species watched and waited to see what chaos would create next.